Now that we know about one-to-one functions, we want to determine whether two one-to-one functions are inverses of one another. So again, a one-to-one function has an inverse of g, so a function of f has the inverse of g if both are true. And it doesn't matter if you use f and g, it's just two different functions. And essentially what we're saying is if we can compose the functions f of g of x and get x, and we can get g of f of x and get x, then those two are inverses of one another. Quite often you will see the inverse denoted as f to the negative first power, and again that just tells you it's an inverse. It doesn't tell you to negate anything or to do the reciprocal of anything. It's just the notation that we use for an inverse. So again, if we take f of the inverse of f of x, we get x. And if we take the inverse of f composed with f of x, then we also get x. So let's take a look at how we might show this. So here are two functions, and in the next video I'll show you how to actually find the inverse, which we could also use here. But here we're just going to look at that composition of functions. So notice I've called one f and I've called one g. So I'm going to find f of g of x, which means I'm going to find f of 1/5 x plus 2. So I'm taking this f function, and whenever I see an x, I'm plugging in 1/5 x plus 2. And my hope is when I do this, that I will end up with x as a solution. So 5 times a fifth is just 1, so that's x, and this is plus 10. Then we have the minus 10, and we can see I get x. So I've checked it in one direction, now I'm going to check it in the other direction. G of f of x. So I'm taking g of the function of f of x. So in my g function here, I'm going to replace x with 5x minus 10 and recopy everything else. 1/5 times 5 is 1, so 1x. 1/5 times minus 10 is minus 2, and then plus 2. Obviously these cancel and I get x. So check, check. Yes, these are inverses because we used the composition of functions to determine they both give us x. Here's one for you to try on your own, so press pause, try this question, and then press play to see how you did. So again, this one threw in a little bit of a story problem, but really not, because they've already given you the two functions, so you're not even asked to come up with the cost function. But just as a reminder, the cost function would be the flat fee of 20, which is why 20 is not being taken times anything, and then $10 per hour, which is the 10x. So we have our cost function, and we have the inverse, and we're basically going to take c of g of x and see what happens. And that would be, c of 1/10 x minus 2, which would be 10 times 1/10 x minus 2 plus 20. 1/10 times 10 is x. 10 times minus 2 is minus 20. Then the plus 20, those cancel to give me x. And then I would check it in the opposite direction, g of c of x. So g of 10x plus 20. So that would be 1/10. And instead of x, I replace it with 10x plus 20. So again, this is just straight up composition of functions. And then we have minus 2. 1/10 times 10x is just x. 1/10 of 20 is 2. So I have x plus 2 minus 2, which just gives me x. So yes, the function g of x is the inverse of c of x.